Sorry.
No worries. That's great. So let's turn to our first poet, Josephine LoRe. Josephine is really a poetry leader in Alberta, Canada. Her poems are becoming more and more popular in what I call the Zoomosphere, and her voice is worth gold. She's published two collections, one titled Unity and the other titled the Cowichan Series. And so Josephine's going to present her poem that's in the E collection. Josephine?
Thank you, Hiram. I'm coming to you from Canada. The city is Calgary, and traditionally it was known as Mohkinstsis, in the land of the Indigenous people. And it was a travel and trade area. It wasn't like a permanent home, but the peoples that moved through this area, I would like to acknowledge them and thank them for bringing language and poetry to the land. The Piikani, the Siksika, the Kainai, Nakota, and Tsuut'ina. And I'm just learning more and more about the Indigenous peoples, and that arbitrary line that separates Canada from US, well, of course, that didn't exist back then. So some of these peoples would have lived in the States as well. I don't remember when I met Hiram. It was a Zoom reading, and there was a click and a connection, and I want to thank you for bringing me on board with this. My poem is called Enough, and I think it can be taken in both ways. Like when you are frustrated with something, you've had enough, but also in terms of enough being sufficient. Enough. Would words be enough? I would sate your hunger. I would build for you a well, ever filled with water clean. I would work alongside as you till the field, watch hope emerge green from brown earth. Would words be enough? I would end your misery, watch each child of yours grow strong and true, teach you to read and to write and to sing, so that your voice be forgotten nevermore. Would words be enough? I would help you bear your burden, bring healing to your wounds and your strife. See beyond lines on a map, beyond color, and you would know you are my sister, my brother, if words were enough. Thank you.
If words were enough. Wonderful, Josephine. Just as a micro interview with you here on the spot, any thoughts on how such a powerful poem like Enough, or poetry in general, can help us speak back to hunger? Any thoughts on that, or thoughts about, as you were writing the poem, how you thought it might contribute to the cause?
Yeah, I think sometimes there's a sense of futility, that you look at a problem that is huge and you think, what can I do? You know, in the past, I've volunteered at the food bank, I've volunteered at the shelters, giving out meals. There's community organizations that distribute empty plastic bags and they ask you to fill them up. And the schools where I teach, we prepare hampers for families that are needy. But it doesn't ever seem that it is enough. So if the words can help to bring an awareness and an understanding and to elicit some compassion, that's my hope. That would be my intention.
Well, I think your hope is being realized. I think that poem does, as I say, reach out and engage and wake up the reader, the listener. And we really appreciate you offering it and being here to present it. We'll have some time, hopefully, at the end of the reading to come back and visit with all the poets, ask any questions that people might have or that Larry or I might have. So Josephine, if you're able to stay with us, we'd love to have you stay here, and so that you can chime in again here in a few minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. So Josephine was our first wonderful poet. Our second terrific poet is Aaron R. Aaron is located in Arlington, Virginia, USA. He's an award-winning poet. He's also the founder of Poetically Correct. He received the first World Food Day Poetry Prize from the United Nations and was also the first poet in residence at the Capital Area Food Bank in Washington, D.C. And in fact, I believe he's probably the first poet who has ever taken a residency at a food bank of any kind and written about it. So, Aaron, what do you have for us today?
Thank you, Hiram. Always an honor and privilege and pleasure, and also to share this wonderful Zoom stage with all of these other poets. I thank you all for your contributions, and I'm honored to be here also. So today, as Hiram mentioned, I'm going to perform Hunger Pains, which was the winning poem for the World Food Day Poetry Competition. In a world that's concerned about the economy and marketing numbers, how do we have people out here starving and dealing with hunger? We've come too far as nations to be facing this type of situation. So we have a plan in 2030 as our destination. And I'm not talking about decreasing, I'm talking about elimination, so we don't have anybody starving in any nations. Speaking of nations, it's kind of strange to me that in this land of plenty of opportunity, there's people walking down the street without food to eat. We spend millions of dollars on entertainment, but that's another topic. There's people out here starving, and we need to do something to stop it. We spend money on wars, but we need to be at war with not feeding the poor. This is a situation we can no longer ignore. I mean, there's families with children walking around with their stomachs growling and sore. We owe it to each other to do so much more, so let's depend on each other and help one another. In order to stop world hunger, the world's going to need each other. So my challenge to you and my challenge to me, do something small or large or independently, because together, everyone achieves more. If we unite as a team, world hunger will be no more, and we can achieve this dream. That sounds like a plan that's worth it to me. So let's all embark on this journey and do little by little, day by day, until 2030, and stop the hunger pains that stain our society. Thank you.
Aaron R. presenting his award-winning poem that makes me stand up, sit up straight and listen, rouses, I think, that won the 2019 or 18 World Food Day Poetry Prize. And you can see why. I've been in a room with a lot of hunger advocates, community-based hunger advocates, and also in a room with a number of agricultural scientists. When Aaron has gotten up in front of them all very bravely and presented his poem, and the room goes incredibly silent. People look up from their desks or tables or chairs, their notepads, their handhelds, and watch him. And then after he presents that poem, really kind of performs that poem, he's swamped by people asking for his contact information, his opinion, and so on. Aaron, what has it been like for you to be involved with this effort to speak back to hunger?
It's been incredible and amazing, and thanks to you for a lot of your connections and things. I think the biggest thing that has stood out to me is kind of, as we see in this room, just how many people from all over the world. I think when I first started, just thinking about hunger is something you see locally, like in the DMV area, but then just seeing how many poets are affected from, not only this area, but all over the United States and then all over just the entire world. And to just have so many talented poets that are speaking out against the same thing. I think that's been the biggest thing that I'm just humbled to be a part of.
Well, we just hope you keep raising your voice and raising your pen to write this amazing poetry that you're producing, you and Josephine. Wow, I mean, between the two of you and the next three poets who we'll be hearing from, just terrific work and very, very helpful in the anti-hunger cause. So thanks, Aaron, so much for being here. And I hope you can stick around for just a little bit as well. We'll come back to this discussion. Let me introduce the next portion of the program. We're going to step away from the poets for just a couple of minutes and listen to a pre-recording by Dr. Melanie Miller Foster, who is with Pennsylvania State University in State College, Pennsylvania, USA. She has been a real advocate for bringing poetry to bear in the anti-hunger cause. And I thought it might be interesting to take a pause from listening to the poetry and to hear from somebody who is a real advocate for use of poetry and has been using poetry in her classrooms at Pennsylvania State University. So let me see if I can call up this video and play it back for you. So this is Melanie here. Thumbs up if you—
Hello everyone, I'm Melanie Miller Foster and I'm a faculty member at Penn State University working in the field of international agriculture. I'm sorry that I had to miss the event today, but I wanted to share a few thoughts about how I believe poetry can reach into different spaces in order to influence students, policymakers, and scientists. I'm going to do this by sharing two short stories that demonstrate how poetry can make a difference in these spaces where we might not traditionally find poetry. So first, I'll go back several years to when Hiram LaRue brought a poet into a meeting in Washington, D.C. So you can probably picture the professionally dressed policymakers, academics, students, and all the other professionals dressed in their dark suits, sitting in a bland hotel ballroom. We were gathered to discuss issues of agriculture and rural development, in which the topic of food security plays a central role. When the poet took the stage at the beginning of our meeting, it was a reminder to all of us that we are focused on a real problem that affects real people, and it very much had a centering effect as we went into our discussions that day. It reminded us that while we have a million things on our minds, like everything from thinking about how our dress shoes hurt our feet, to the fact that more and more email is piling up in our inboxes, to worrying about who in the room we need to talk to in order to advance our careers. Those few minutes of poetry helped call our attention to the human cost of this issue and the duty that we have to our fellow humans to work to solve it. So the next little story I'll tell is from a class where I was recently a guest speaker. I used poetry, specifically the writing of a haiku, as an activating strategy during that class session. I asked students to think about what they had learned in the class so far and to write a haiku about it. There were 42 students in the class, and after a few minutes of work time, each student stood up and read their haiku, one after another. It was like a poetry blast. 126 lines of poetry read out on what previously had been a sleepy Friday afternoon. After the last student read their haiku, I collected the index cards in which they were written and presented the stack of cards to the instructors. Both instructors had tears in their eyes. They said that it was wonderful to hear how the students connected with the material presented in the class, and to hear it in such a positive way. They later told me that they felt that no one was listening to them as they taught about the subject matter that was their life's work, and also how hard it was to connect with a room full of students wearing masks. Poetry was a vehicle to show these scientists how enthusiastic and inspired their students were about the subjects being taught in the class. And so you might be wondering what the subject of that class was. Actually, it was a plant pathology class focused on the topic of fungus. Yeah, fungus. Imagine 126 lines of poetry making up a wonderful ode to fungus. I can't say that I was a big poetry fan before Hiram and Poetry X Hunger came along, but I've come to see how poetry can provide the attention to emotion that is often absent in policy and scientific spaces. My own work is focused on some of the world's most urgent and wicked problems, such as food security. And I find that it is easy to become discouraged in the face of such huge and seemingly insurmountable problems. It's hard to feel like just one person can make a difference. It's difficult to focus on the fact that people suffer from hunger today, but we have to think of the long-term and sustainable solutions to food insecurity. And I've come to see how poetry is a wonderful method of attending to these conflicting emotions, to processing the soul-shattering facts surrounding the issue of hunger, and to help both the writers and the readers understand that everyone has a role to play in combating food insecurity. So, thank you for letting me share these few thoughts today, and I hope you have a great event.
That was Dr. Melanie Miller-Foster at Pennsylvania State University. And if you heard her mention a poet coming into a meeting as the first example of her introduction to using poetry in this mode, that poet was Erin R., who you just heard. So Erin was there at that meeting, and she still talks about that event and your impact on it. So, and she does such a beautiful job in that video of describing how poetry can reach what I call the heartstrings, and so bring emotion, if you will, powerful emotion into the discussion. So let's go back then and visit with three more terrific poets. Our third poet is Taku Chikepe from Zimbabwe. Taku is a real mover and shaker in the poetry world. He launched a journal, an online poetry journal called The Sailor's Review, that showcases the work of African and other fine poets from around the world. In fact, I believe, sneak preview, that Ladi Di will be one of the featured poets in an upcoming issue. Currently, Taku is a graduate student at Duke's Divinity School in North Carolina, USA. So we're so pleased to have Taku with us. Taku, you've got the mic.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here. My poem for today is entitled, We Are the Solution. Enjoy. Food comes from God. God must be honored. Climate change being our modern day concern, we people must behave. For farmers and all producers of food, yes, we cry out for empowerment, market expansion, and food for all. Intoxicating food, diseases causing food at the expense of our choices. Who is making millions and billions out of this? We shun our way away from our lives. We close our doors. Policymakers, help us in this issue. Why should millions and millions of dollars be stocked somewhere for whatever reason at the expense of millions and millions of people dying of hunger? Hunger is not a state of mind, it is reality. According to Ellen F. Davis, the Israelites almost rejected God because of hunger. Can you imagine? Eradication of hunger comes out of love and believing in the future. We can't be sick at the same time hungry. Lord, deliver healing and abundance in us and for us. Our brains united in the name of all our nations is all that we are lacking to deal with this life-threatening disease called hunger. Like Isaac, money we have, food we have, machinery we have, and good weather we still have. What is it that we don't have? What is it that we don't have to eradicate hunger? What is it that we don't have? What is it that we don't have to eradicate hunger? Thank you.
Wow. My goodness, Taku. Is that the premiere of that poem, or is that one that you've recently written?
Yes, so this one I just wrote it, I think about 2 days ago.
Well, you can understand why Taku is at Duke Divinity School. Powerful presentation, bringing all sorts of history and faith into the incredibly important dialogue about hunger, and just the power of that piece. So Taku, please share that with us at Poetry X Hunger. We'd love to post that and post a reading of you and a recording of you presenting it.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much. Any additional quick thoughts about how poetry can activate work in the anti-hunger cause, Taku?
Maybe I'll just share from my poetry identity, from the way that I write poetry. I believe poetry is a gift, and in addition to poetry being a gift, poetry also deals with where you are. For example, the time when I was in Africa, I would write a lot of poetry, but that is influenced by culture, because I'm seeing a lot of culture around me. And right now, since I'm now in the divinity school, there's a lot of, I'm consuming a lot of divinity books. So there's also that assimilation of divinity getting into poetry. So maybe just that consciousness, like sometimes as poets, we can also share ourselves with poetry through everything that is around us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And your poem makes an important point too, that hunger has been with us forever, historically, and we'd like to think it won't always be with us, but it certainly has been with us as long as there have been people who needed to eat. In other words, forever.
That's very true.
So, well, thank you, Taku, for being here, and hope you can stay on for just a little bit longer as well.
Sure.
That would be great. Great.
Thank you so much, Doctor.
Sure. Our next poet is the amazing Sylvia Diane Ladi Di Beverly. She's a well-known and really beloved poet in what's called Prince George's County, Maryland, USA. But increasingly in the Zoom world, she's a beloved poet wherever Zoom is zooming. Her work has appeared widely, and her books of poems include one that pairs up poems with favorite recipes. So Ladi Di, what do you have for us today?
Thank you, Hiram. I'm going to read a poem entitled Homeless and Hungry. Where do I go to be safe? Where, oh, where do my children and I get a bite to eat during this pandemic? Let it be told so someone can help our empty stomachs not to hurt. So hungry, so cold at night. My babies cannot stop crying. Fear and pain reasons why. Change gotta come for survival to remain. Hard times drive us to be homeless and hungry. Wide-eyed innocent children stare in wonderment. All our babies know are severe pains of hunger. All our babies want are peanut butter and jelly sandwich. How about an apple? How about a banana or a sip of milk? Some juice. Hear our baby's feeble cry. Listen how youth whimper. Can you please show us a way to shelter and food? Food will take away pain. Unite to help rid our hunger. Help mothers stay sane. Unity brings phenomenal change. Thank you for awesome help you give to X out gloom. So my babies will have cover overhead soon. So my babies will stop crying.
Mm, mm, mm. Lady Di, as always, just amazingly moving pieces that I've talked about calls to actions. Yours is a plea for action. You bring it home, and really, really amazing, amazing work. Lady Di, tell us the title of that poem one more time.
Homeless and hungry.
And can you give us just a little bit of any additional background as you were writing the poem, or what motivated you to write the poem? Was there something you saw or felt?
I felt. Wrote it specifically for Poetry X Hunger. And I thought it would be even more attractive or rouse people if they could hear a mother just pleading for some help to save her insanity, her mind, and to help the cry of her babies every night, and she's just pleading, even just, you don't have to give us anything extravagant, just a piece of fruit, just some milk for the children would help to solve the pain in their stomachs every night.
Right.
That's why they're crying.
So making it real.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, we're so grateful to you and your voice, your powerful voice, for speaking up and out about this important scourge called hunger. Really appreciate that, Lady Di, and hope that you can stay on for just a few more minutes as well, because we'd love to circle back and visit with you and the other poets in just a few minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our last but absolutely not least poet is Tony Treanor. Tony is a very well-known and respected poet from County Limerick in Ireland. And so in case you hadn't noticed, this is a worldwide speak up and speak back to hunger by poets. So Tony is coming to us from Ireland. His poems, which I just love, tend to look back and ahead with all kinds of wonder, and his voice, as you're about to hear, really mesmerizes me, at least. So Tony, welcome to the mic. It's so good to have you here from Ireland.
Oh, thank you very much, Hiram. I hope everybody can hear me okay over there.
Yep.
It's an honor to be here, and thank you for inviting me to join you here this evening. I thought I might, I was interested to hear in the video about the lady mentioning a fungus. Of course, that was the root problem of the potato famine in the 1840s. My poem today does look back a bit, but I think the image I'm trying to create is universal and is experienced today. many, many areas, both in the as you said yourself, in the real, in the cultivated world, and in areas where there isn't so much cultivation, or people are left alone and unknown. It was the case, just as a quick history lesson before I read it, it's a short poem, but the Irish famine occurred between 1845 and roughly 1850. It was as a result of an attack by a fungus on the potato plant. And this is all they had to eat. Majority of the people had only potatoes to eat. And once that crop failed, of course, there was nothing to replace it. There's a misunderstanding somewhat that there was a famine in Ireland. There wasn't a famine in Ireland. The country was full of food. The ships were absolutely loaded to the gunwales in the ports of Irish ports, shipping food abroad during the whole famine. Corn, wheat, beef, mutton, lamb, plenty of food, but it was all being shipped out abroad, and the people were basically have to die. 1 million people died, men, women, and children, and about 1 million took the coffin ships that took them both to Europe and to the Americas. In their madness, many were found with grass juice in their mouths. They began to eat grass towards the end of the torment they were in. They were found alongside the road eating grass. Their mouths were full of grass juice. And that's the madness that eventually took them. The incident I referred to in the poem actually happened. There was an historical event where the hungry people in a particular area descended upon the landlord's house, and he was hosting a dinner at the time, and they could smell the roasting meat as they were driven from the premises to die in the hills. So it's more to focus on just, to my mind, what people must experience in this horrendous, forgotten environment, where there are people who are forgotten. Yes, it's good work being done and you're doing great work, Hiram, but there are people out there today who don't have a voice and are dying alone, and they're dying a horrible death of hunger. And this is what I think we should be focusing on. So here we go. It's called Ireland 1845-1850. There's some Irish in it, but I translated immediately afterwards, so don't worry about it. Ireland 1845-1850. Ireland, the aching, stomach tight, skin taut, stretched across poking ribs. My ear prati imagine agus prati nyon mar a My God, potatoes in the morning, potatoes in the evening, as the poet said. A hot, clammy summer. Potatoes, life giver, dragged from the earth with fevered hands, dirt-scarred nails scratching, digging the mulched black thing, clawing to the touch from the earth. A foul death stench from what had been a potato. And God save us. And we have nothing else. The land bereft of its nourishing harvest, potatoes. Even along the coast, the boats are no more. In the cities, if you have the money for the inflated prices on the food markets and islands where there is fish, there is some salvation if you have the strength and skill to catch them. If you have a currach to sail to find them, or the ragged group of women and girls chipping reluctant shellfish from the sea-drenched rocks, or eating raw seaweed to ease the gnawing need, their gaunt frames poisoned, leading to the agony of death without hope. What will we do now? The cravings, walking barefoot to the landlord's house, the smell of cooking meat from his kitchen, turned away by his bailiffs with masks about their faces to hide the stench of human despair. Food, scenting like hunting dogs, the imagined taste on the air, like ragged, unseeing things, they stagger across moor and heath, the mountain wind cutting through to the bone. The chill of streams crossed, numbing their bloody bare feet, staring unseeing with grass-juiced mouths, the final act of despair and madness dripping from their slack-jawed lips. Dying in heaving gasps amidst a mountain landscape falling to emerald beauty, to the quiet of field and valley. The last sight and sound they see, lying face up in a ditch or on the side of the road, watching with the indifference of the dying. The slow-moving gunmetal clouds pasted across a cold sky, reflected in their eyes. A raven hovering, feathering a winged beat for the approach of endless night, a lonely cry on the air, notes their passing. A lonely place to die, by the roadside. A light breeze, bending blade of grass and petal flower, fingers clawing the earth in a final rigor of agony. before blessed death takes them. On Gortamore, 1845 to 1850.
Mm.
That's it, man. Back to you.
Wow, wow, Tony. Goodness, goodness.
It was a terrible time. It still affects the Irish psyche. Has done for generations. I think it's another aspect we haven't quite talked about, I feel, Hiram, is how it affects people generationally, generation after generation after generation.
Its legacy. It also, your poem and your introduction of that poem also puts the finger on the fact that hunger is often much more than an agricultural issue.
Yes.
It's a political issue often. It can even be a religious issue,
Yes.
a social issue.
Yes.
Hunger has even been used, or maybe more appropriately said, food has been used as a weapon of war, withholding food as a way to suppress people through the ages. And it's not just through the ages, it is still being used in the times today as a way of suppressing, repressing people and population. So Tony, the right word isn't enriched, but you've broadened the discussion, the point of view here by bringing that historical message in for us to consider.
I think it's also important, as you say, to realize that particularly with the Irish famine was indeed a political thing. There was forces that were moving to not to help the people who were starving, but to be an example of them. And I feel that that's maybe happening today in certain parts of the world as well. I agree.
Yeah. You know? As you said, there was plenty of food. It just wasn't being made available, or wasn't affordable. It just wasn't being made available. It was being exported from Ireland.
It was busy for capitalism at its best. People were making money. They actually called the troops out at bayonet point at one point to protect the ships as the starving tried to get on board the ships and get some of the food. Were held back at bayonet point because there was profits. These ships were, it was profit being made here. People made money out of the famine. And I believe it's another aspect I would like to say to people. I'm absolutely sure there are people making money not only of war, but out of famine today as well.
From people suffering, you're undoubtedly right.
Well,
Tony, can't thank you enough for bringing those lessons into the circle today, as particularly through your poem, but also in what you've described before and just now, right after you've read your poem. Really appreciate that very, very much. It as I say, it broadens, it expands the whole notion of what we're working with here. So really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Sure, thank you. Larry, that we have one more recording of a poem that I'd like to play right at the very end. But you've heard now all the wonderful poets, the 5 wonderful poets from around the world, speak up and speak back to current hunger, past hunger, its legacy. Larry, do you have any thoughts or questions of the poets?
Tony brought up it's always political.
Yes.
The series of choices that are made.
Yes.
And it's been forever. I don't, it boggles my mind. But my 2 thoughts is, one, that this is always a political situation. The other is that the wonders of poetry that can make you feel things and maybe make it more intelligible to people who compartmentalize, right? I don't have to deal with this. And there's so many issues. But that's the wonder. That's the wonder of art and poetry in particular, and helping us communicate and recognize us as the human animal that needs to deal with each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the potency of poetry to influence, impact, and have folks pay attention where they simply might otherwise not be engaged. Josephine, well, any of the poets, but I'm especially interested in Josephine because I believe she's going to have to leave us here shortly. Now that you've heard the other poets' poems, do you have any further thoughts on just generally the role of poetry in speaking up and speaking back to to hunger? Any additional thoughts, Josephine?
Yeah, and it's based on the inauguration of the presidents, and at the performance, there was a young poet, and I'm sure you'll know her name. Was it
Anita Gorman? Yeah.
Yes, and just how compelling that was. And I think I shared it with the students that I was teaching, and we all held our breath because there's such truth and there's such power, and that's what I'm hearing as well today. Like I think our lenses may be a little bit different. Our perspective based on where we're standing, what we're looking at could be a little bit different, but there's so much power. And the little video you had by that faculty member, and she had her students do something very simple. Like haiku is 17 syllables. And it was just so moving. And I think if each of us were to take this and make it a seed and plant it in the ground and see what comes of it, nurture this, I think there could be a huge difference. And if I could just say something else, because I've been thinking about this for a while, because you're opening up ideas in my mind. There's an old proverb, I believe it's Chinese in origin, that if you give a man to fish, he will eat for a day. And if you teach a man to fish, he will eat for his life. And I'm wondering if there could be community projects that involve school-age children and members of the community and the parents, and create gardens, sustainable gardens, and pass that knowledge on so that we're not at the mercy of supply chain or of economics or whatever's happening politically. Because I agree, I think there is enough food being grown on the planet. Nobody should be hungry. And if you give somebody a bag of groceries, that'll help them through the week, but it'll make them dependent. So how do we get people to be independent and be able to share their excess with others? Those are my thoughts. Yeah,
Sure.
Thank you so much.
There's so much interest these days in community-based agriculture and gardening around the world, not just in one country, but around the world. And for that very reason, Josephine, to enable, to empower community members to be self-sufficient, or at least partially sufficient in their food needs. So absolutely, you're right on target. And it would be wonderful to have some poets look over the shoulders of some of those community gardeners and write about it.
Yes.
Taku, any thoughts from Duke Divinity School?
Let me interject.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'm sorry, Larry. Sure.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that the companies have done is create genetically modified seeds that don't reproduce. It's again, it's politics and profit. Create. I mean, where traditionally, whatever you're growing, you have seed from, and that's what you plant. A lot of the modern seeds that we sell around the world won't do that. You have to buy new seed every year. And it's a real challenge of how to approach things in a more self-sufficient manner, which of course, which is under great challenge. It's really harder and harder with
and Larry, you're pointing out too the reason why there's such an interest these days in what are called heritage plants or heritage varieties that do breed true and that can be grown season after season in gardens. There's just a burgeoning interest in those and markets for them. I get catalogs that only list kind of heritage types of vegetables and grains and the like. So you're absolutely right. That's one other area where politics gets involved, so to speak. Lady Di, any thoughts about poetry and hunger now that you've heard your other co-poets? present?
Well, so many thoughts. I mean, they're just running through my head. But one thing comes to mind when we first started the Poetry X Hunger, and I knew that I was going to be going before the Food and Drug
Food and Ag Organization, yeah, FAO,
agricultural.
yeah.
When I knew that, I reached out to one of my youth. I love to hear what the children feel and say and get them involved. And my little niece, my goddaughter, said, she wrote to me, God is too rich for any of his children to be hungry. And she started some type of food, bagging lunches and going out with her mom to food banks to take these lunches, and also got her classmates to do the same thing. So it became a really big thing, and it's something that they do annually now. And so as Josephine mentioned, teaching the children to and people to plant gardens and to have, to have fields of food where people would be able to just go and get food if they're hungry is another good way. And one of our poet friends, Newbery Prize winner Kwame Alexander, has a play coming out at the Kennedy Center. And I think it's in regards to one of his books. Well, he has two things going on, but one is a little girl planting a rooftop garden and over at her home. And so we're looking forward to that. One is at the Kennedy Center, and one is a big thing with children made for TV with Disney that he's gotten. So, one award or one group of attention will say, even with hunger, will attract another. One thing, it's like a snowball effect.
Absolutely.
So this is going to be at the Kennedy Center November 20th or that week. And then he's also down in, and we're talking about hunger, and we're talking about children, getting the children involved. Also getting them to enjoy reading for the necessity of life. We have to know to read. So having some good elementary information that can carry them on through the years. So engage the children with and receive their ideas and incorporate them.
You do that so beautifully in your work.
Thank you.
Lady Di mentioned Kennedy Center. That's an arts center in Washington, D.C. in the USA. Lady Di is also known for her poem that speaks up and about food waste. So she's written on various aspects of hunger. Let's quickly check in with Taku, Aaron, and Tony. Any final words from you gentlemen before we turn to the final poem of the afternoon or evening, depending on your time zone? Aaron or Taku or Tony, any closing thoughts?
I also think that poetry, the other fascinating part about poetry is the generation of ideas. As poets, sometimes we don't have solutions to things, but we generate ideas because our brains, they're always thinking of all sorts of things. And that is very important, especially for the policy, for the policy makers, because our ideas, they can be really fruitful in terms of that. For example, some solutions, they are against the business element of life. For example, people want to develop a car that uses solar energy. It means they're going to step on the toes of people who are using diesel and all sorts of things. So it means even if their idea is brilliant, because they're stepping on some other people's toes, it can be stopped. So I think through poetry, ex-hunger, and all other things that are happening, we just really need to keep on sharing our ideas and having that good relationship with the policy makers. Because as an African here in the North Carolina,
Terrific insight, Taku. This is
Thank you,
terrific.
Dr.
Yeah, generating those ideas, the emotions. Yeah, so important in the policy discussions, in the decision-making, political, at the political level. We're working to try to bring poetry to bear in some of the U.S. Congress members' offices. We'll keep you posted on that front. But yeah, absolutely, at that level, the kind of ideas that are shared, generated, are just so important to making headway. So let's turn then. Thanks everyone for being here. Let's close out the session with an amazingly powerful poem by a colleague who can't be with us, but is based in Zimbabwe. Her name is Patience Gumbo. And Patience is just, I'd never met her, of course, except through the Zoom room. But my sense is, from the way she reads and the way she writes, she must be an incredibly impactful individual in her village, in her town, in her region. You'll see here in this closing poem that she's going to read us or present to us through an audio recording. I think the poem is titled Hunger. Why I always like to close with this particular poem. You may need to turn your volume up just a titch on your computer. Her voice tends to be just a little bit soft. So Aaron, can you help us play back Patient Gumbo's poem, Hunger?
Hunger poem written by Linue Patience Gumbo. Hunger. It rumbles like the sound before a thunderstorm. An inner ache like that of a woman in travail follows after. I toss and turn and hope tonight will be better. My mind wandering every second of every minute of every day. When it shall be full to the brim and running over, then will I appreciate scarcity in times of abundance, or treasure abundance in a spell of scarcity. Still, it remains a dream worth waiting for, as I beg for the crumbs off the master's table. Daily we scramble with the township canine. The stronger always win in battle. I would be wise and decide to forget how life on the other side was. Hunger, you define me not. Yes, we lay side by side, shadow to shadow. Still you define me not. There is still an ounce of sanity in me. Yet a little milk, a little meat, a little scent of fresh pie, baked to perfection, would go a long way. Taste buds running wild in the rich flavors form a union. But fate has favored the poor with lack. As the rich are endowed with more riches, the true taste of my own saliva has become so sweet, while few months' debris from chewed green leaves are tugged safely away between my teeth. I wish to see your face and stare deep within those lifeless eyes, What guts you have, your desires to wipe all humanity, as you stand akimbo with your twin kindred, corruption and disease, adamant to infest all in its path, till none whimpers, sighs, or groans. Still we found you here, and remain here you shall. Or when shall your scorpion sting lose its edge? Hunger my foe, never my mate, never again welcome, but fade away into thin air, into the dust 6 feet under, beneath the shadows where none can see your hand. Go, return not. We don't want you here. I thank you.
Thank you. That's Patience Gumbo. Thank you, Aaron, for making that recording available to us. Hunger, you define me not. Hunger, we don't want you here. Just always find those words and the voice that she uses to convey them, amazingly powerful. I've posted already in the chat room the site for the e-collection. I'm going to post the email address if you'd like to be in touch. I hope that our guests have appreciated the presentation today of these amazing poets from around the world as they speak up and speak back to hunger. And Larry, I'm going to turn it back to you with any kind of closing thoughts or remarks.
Oh my. There's that interesting what? Again, politics and art. How do these things come together? How do they combine? It's funny, as one gets older, you see the connections. I know as a young man, I was much more actively political and less artistic. But one of my heroes was Dennis Brutus, who was an amazing poet from South Africa, who was in the ANC, who was responsible for getting South Africa and Rhodesia kicked out of the Olympics. And he had these two lives, right? He was this incredible political activist, and he was this incredible poet. People from one side didn't know his other side. And I thought that was so interesting. But he was an inspiration to me of how you can do both things, the relationship between them. And one of the things that I try to do with what Moonstone does is the issue is communication, especially in today's world where people aren't talking to each other, where everything's but I think art, again, is a way we can communicate and the way we can break down some of these divisions, an area that we can relate to each other. That's all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Larry, for giving us the platform here, providing the platform for us to share our work. And hopefully this will only be the beginning of such efforts. We'll continue to speak up, speak back to hunger with powerful poetry, and rely on poets like those in the room today and poet impresarios like Larry to help with that cause. I want to wish everyone a good weekend, what remains of it, and hope you'll be in touch. We appreciate you being here for these few minutes today, and wish everyone well. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
So long.
Bye-bye, Lady Di.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Larry.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Taku. Thank you, Aaron. And everyone, and Tony.
Bye now.
My pleasure. Thank you.